What would you do if you walked into a routine medical appointment and uncovered a crime so shocking it would haunt you forever? It was a gray Tuesday morning in March 2021 when 24-year-old Rachel Martinez sat in the waiting room of Riverside Medical Center, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled tissue. Beside her, her older sister Carmen spoke in hushed, urgent tones to the receptionist. "She's been having severe abdominal pain for weeks," Carmen explained, her voice carrying an edge of frustration. "I finally convinced her to come in. She's been so difficult about seeing doctors lately." But Dr. Sarah Chun, observing from across the waiting room, noticed something that made her pause. Rachel wasn't just nervous about a medical appointment. She was terrified. Her entire body was rigid with fear, and every time Carmen reached out to touch her arm or shoulder, Rachel flinched away as if burned. This wasn't typical pre-appointment anxiety. This was something much darker. When Rachel's name was finally called, she stood on unsteady legs, her face pale and drawn. Carmen immediately moved to follow, but Rachel whispered something that stopped her sister in her tracks. "Please, I need to do this alone." The look that passed between the sisters in that moment told Dr. Chen everything she needed to know. Something was very, very wrong. What Dr. Chen discovered during that examination would expose a web of control, manipulation, and abuse that had been hidden in plain sight for over 2 years. And the ultrasound she was about to perform would reveal a secret so devastating, it would shatter multiple lives forever. Stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about recognizing the signs of domestic abuse. To understand how Rachel Martinez ended up in that examination room, we need to go back 3 years to when she met Marcus Rivera at a downtown Seattle coffee shop. Rachel was 21 then, a bright college student studying social work with dreams of helping vulnerable families. She was independent, confident, and surrounded by friends who adored her quick wit and generous heart. Marcus seemed perfect. At 29, he was charming, successful, and attentive in ways that made Rachel feel like the most important person in the world. He brought her flowers, remembered every detail of their conversations, and seemed genuinely interested in her goals and dreams. What Rachel didn't recognize were the subtle red flags that domestic abuse experts now know to watch for. Marcus gradually began commenting on her friendships. "Sarah seems jealous of our relationship," he would say. "I don't think she wants to see you happy." Or, "Your family just doesn't understand how much I care about you." Slowly, methodically, Marcus isolated Rachel from her support system. He convinced her to move in with him after just 6 months, arguing that it would save money and allow them to spend more time together. He encouraged her to drop out of college, insisting that he could support them both and that she was too smart for her professors anyway. By the time Rachel realized what was happening, she was completely dependent on Marcus financially and emotionally. Her friends had stopped calling after months of canceled plans and awkward interactions. Her family relationships were strained from constant arguments about Marcus's controlling behavior. But the worst part was what happened behind closed doors. Marcus's charm disappeared when they were alone. He monitored Rachel's every movement, controlled her access to money, and used psychological manipulation techniques that left her questioning her own reality. When Rachel tried to assert independence, Marcus's response was swift and calculated. He never left visible marks. He was too smart for that. Instead, he used fear, intimidation, and emotional cruelty to maintain absolute control over every aspect of Rachel's life. What Rachel didn't know was that her sister Carmen had been desperately trying to find a way to help her for months, and that morning at the clinic would finally give them both the opening they needed. Dr. Chen had been practicing family medicine for 15 years, and she had developed an instinct for recognizing victims of domestic abuse. Everything about Rachel's behavior, the way she spoke in whispers, the way she constantly looked toward the door, the way she seemed to shrink into herself, triggered every alarm bell in the doctor's professional experience. "Rachel," Dr. Chen said gently, "I want you to know that everything we discuss in this room is completely confidential. You're safe here." The simple word "safe" caused Rachel's carefully constructed facade to crack. Tears began streaming down her face, and for the first time in months, she began to speak freely. "Something is wrong with me," Rachel whispered. "I've been having pain, nausea, fatigue. Marcus says I'm just being dramatic, that I'm always complaining about something. But Carmen insisted I come in today when he was at work." Dr. Chen nodded, making notes while carefully observing Rachel's body language. "Tell me about the pain. When did it start?" "Maybe 6 weeks ago. I thought it was just stress. Things have been difficult at home lately." When Dr. Chen asked about Rachel's relationship, the floodgates opened. Rachel described years of psychological manipulation, financial control, and escalating threats. Marcus had convinced her that no one would believe her if she tried to leave, that she was damaged goods, who was lucky to have someone willing to put up with her. "He monitors everything," Rachel explained through tears. "My phone, my computer, even my conversations with Carmen. He says it's because he loves me, but—" Dr. Chen's heart broke for this young woman, but she maintained her professional composure as she prepared for the physical examination. "Rachel, I'd like to do an ultrasound to check for any internal causes of your abdominal pain. Is that okay with you?" Rachel nodded, lying back on the examination table with visible anxiety. Dr. Chen applied the ultrasound gel and began the scan, expecting to find signs of stress-related digestive issues or perhaps an ovarian cyst. What appeared on the screen made Dr. Chen's hands freeze. Rachel was 12 weeks pregnant. The silence in the room was deafening as Rachel stared at the ultrasound monitor, her face cycling through shock, fear, and something that looked almost like relief. "I can't," Rachel started, then stopped. "He can't know about this. You don't understand. If Marcus finds out I'm pregnant, he'll never let me leave." But what Rachel said next would transform this medical appointment into a criminal investigation. "Dr. Chun, I need you to know something. We haven't been intimate in months. Not by choice. Marcus has been forcing himself on me. I tried to say no, but he said married couples can't rape each other." Dr. Chun felt her professional training kick into overdrive. This wasn't just domestic abuse anymore. This was sexual assault, and Rachel needed help that went far beyond medical care. Dr. Chen immediately activated the hospital's domestic violence protocol. Within minutes, a trained social worker named Lisa Park arrived to speak with Rachel privately, while Dr. Chun consulted with law enforcement. Rachel's story poured out in fragments, each detail more devastating than the last. Marcus had complete control over their shared apartment. He had isolated her from friends and family so thoroughly that she had nowhere to go. He controlled all their finances, and Rachel hadn't had access to her own money in over a year. But the pregnancy changed everything. For the first time since moving in with Marcus, Rachel had something to protect besides herself. "I can't raise a child in that environment," Rachel told Lisa. "I won't let my baby grow up thinking this is what love looks like." Meanwhile, Dr. Chun was speaking with Detective James Rodriguez from the Seattle Police Department's Domestic Violence Unit. The case was complicated by the fact that Rachel and Marcus weren't legally married, despite Marcus telling Rachel repeatedly that common law marriage gave him the right to control her decisions. Detective Rodriguez had seen hundreds of domestic abuse cases, but something about Rachel's situation raised red flags that went beyond typical intimate partner violence. "Doctor," he said, "based on what you're telling me about the level of control and isolation, I'm concerned we might be looking at something closer to human trafficking. This man has essentially imprisoned this woman in her own home." When Carmen was finally allowed back into the examination room, she broke down completely. "I've been trying to get her away from him for months," she sobbed. "Every time I tried to talk to her, she would defend him. I thought I was losing my sister forever." But Rachel was finally ready to fight back. With the support of Dr. Chun, Lisa Park, and Detective Rodriguez, Rachel began planning her escape. The pregnancy, ironically, had given her the motivation she needed to break free from Marcus's control. However, leaving would be more dangerous than staying. Statistics show that domestic violence victims are most likely to be seriously injured or killed when they attempt to leave their abusers. Marcus had made it clear that he considered Rachel as property, and he wasn't going to give her up without a fight. What none of them realized was that Marcus was about to escalate his behavior in ways that would transform Rachel's private nightmare into a very public criminal case. 3 days after Rachel's clinic visit, Marcus Rivera sat in his downtown Seattle office, staring at a credit card statement that would change everything. As a financial analyst for a major investment firm, Marcus was methodical about monitoring every expense in their household. When he saw the charge for Rachel's medical appointment, an appointment she had never mentioned, his carefully controlled facade began to crack. Marcus had spent 2 years creating the perfect system of control. He monitored Rachel's phone, tracked her movements through GPS, and had convinced her that she was completely dependent on him for survival. The idea that she had sought medical care without his permission was a direct challenge to his authority. That evening, Marcus confronted Rachel with a calm that was more terrifying than anger. "How was your doctor's appointment, Rachel?" The blood drained from Rachel's face. She had hoped to keep the pregnancy secret until she could figure out how to leave safely. I had some stomach pain. Karma made me go. It was nothing serious." Marcus studied her face with the analytical precision he used in his professional work. "Nothing serious? Then why do I have a charge here for an ultrasound?" Rachel's training as a social work student had taught her about domestic violence patterns, but experiencing them firsthand was entirely different. She could see Marcus's mood shifting into the dangerous territory that always preceded his worst behavior. "Marcus, please, I can explain. You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. Marcus had already figured it out. "And you thought you could hide it from me." What happened next would later be described in court documents as a systematic campaign of imprisonment and psychological torture. Marcus immediately confiscated Rachel's phone, disabled the internet in their apartment, and informed his workplace that he would be working from home for the foreseeable future. He installed new locks on their apartment door, locks that could only be opened from the inside with a key that Marcus kept on his person at all times. Rachel was now literally imprisoned in her own home. But Marcus made one crucial mistake. In his rage, he forgot about Carmen's growing suspicions and her determination to protect her sister. When Rachel failed to respond to texts for 2 days straight, something that had never happened before, Carmen knew something was terribly wrong. Rachel Martinez had been planning for this moment for months. As a paralegal for a domestic violence law firm, she understood the legal system better than most family members of abuse victims. She also understood that timing would be everything. When Rachel suddenly went silent, Carmen immediately contacted Detective Rodriguez. Together, they began building a case that would give them legal grounds to perform a welfare check on Rachel. But Marcus was smarter than the average abuser. He had been careful never to leave physical evidence of his control. There were no hospital records of suspicious injuries, no documented threats, no witnesses to his psychological manipulation. What Carmen and Detective Rodriguez needed was proof that Rachel was being held against her will. That proof came from an unexpected source. Rachel's former college roommate, Jennifer Walsh, had been worried about her friend's isolation for months. When Carmen reached out to Jennifer, she revealed something that would crack the case wide open. "Rachel gave me a spare key to her apartment 2 years ago," Jennifer explained. "She said it was in case of emergencies, but she made me promise to never use it unless I was genuinely concerned for her safety." Jennifer still had the key. Working with Detective Rodriguez, they developed a plan. Jennifer would use the spare key to enter the apartment under the pretense of checking on Rachel's welfare. If Marcus had indeed imprisoned Rachel, Jennifer's unexpected arrival would provide the evidence they needed. But they had to be careful. If Marcus was as dangerous as Rachel's behavior suggested, Jennifer could be walking into a potentially deadly situation. The plan was set for Thursday morning. When Marcus's work calendar showed, he had a mandatory office meeting. They would have a narrow window of opportunity to document Rachel's situation and potentially extract her from the apartment. What they found when Jennifer opened that apartment door would provide evidence for criminal charges that no one had anticipated. At 10:15 a.m. on Thursday, Jennifer Walsh turned Rachel's spare key in the lock and stepped into what looked like a normal Seattle apartment. But the silence was wrong, thick and oppressive in a way that made her skin crawl. "Rachel, Jennifer called softly. "It's Jen. Are you okay?" The response came as a whisper from the bedroom. "Jen? Oh my God. How did you get in here?" What Jennifer found in that bedroom would haunt her forever. Rachel was sitting on the floor beside the bed, still wearing the same clothes from 3 days earlier. Empty food containers and water bottles were scattered around her, suggesting she had been confined to this single room. The bedroom door had a new deadbolt lock installed on the outside. "He locked me in," Rachel whispered, tears streaming down her face. "After he found out about the pregnancy, he said I couldn't be trusted to make my own decisions anymore. He only lets me out to use the bathroom, and only when he's here to supervise." Jennifer immediately called Detective Rodriguez, who dispatched units to the apartment. But they had to move quickly. Marcus's meeting was scheduled to end at 11:30 a.m. While they waited for police to arrive, Rachel revealed the full extent of Marcus's escalating behavior. He had been forcing her to take pregnancy tests daily, claiming he needed to monitor her condition. He had drawn up what he called a pregnancy contract, outlining rules for her behavior that included restrictions on everything from her diet to her sleeping position. Most disturbing was Marcus's plan for the future. He had told Rachel that once the baby was born, she would never be allowed to leave the apartment again. He was planning to homeschool the child and create a completely isolated family unit where he maintained absolute control. "He said I was too unstable to be trusted in public," Rachel explained. "That I was lucky he was willing to take care of me and the baby, because no one else would want damaged goods." When Detective Rodriguez arrived with backup officers, they found evidence of systematic imprisonment that went far beyond typical domestic abuse. Marcus had installed cameras throughout the apartment to monitor Rachel's movements, created detailed schedules, controlling every aspect of her daily routine, and maintained written logs of her behavior that read like psychological torture protocols. But Rachel's ordeal was far from over. Marcus was about to return home to find his carefully constructed world of control completely shattered, and his reaction would prove just how dangerous he had become. Marcus Rivera returned to his apartment at 11:47 a.m. to find police cars in the parking lot and his front door standing open. The sight that greeted him inside would have been shocking to any normal person, his girlfriend being interviewed by detectives, his control systems being photographed as evidence, his private domain invaded by authorities. But Marcus's reaction wasn't shock. It was cold, calculated rage. "Officers," he said calmly, "I believe there's been some misunderstanding. Rachel has been unwell lately, and I've been caring for her during a difficult pregnancy. She's prone to dramatic episodes." Detective Rodriguez had encountered manipulative abusers before, but Marcus's composure was unsettling. Even caught red-handed with overwhelming evidence of imprisonment and psychological abuse, Marcus maintained the demeanor of a reasonable man dealing with an unreasonable situation. "Sir, we found locks on the outside of bedroom doors and evidence that Ms. Martinez was being confined against her will," Detective Rodriguez explained. "Rachel has been having episodes of confusion and disorientation," Marcus replied smoothly. "I installed those locks for her own safety, to prevent her from wandering during her pregnancy. Her family will confirm that she's been unstable lately." But Rachel had found her voice again. For the first time in 2 years, she spoke up for herself with witnesses present. "That's not true," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You imprisoned me. You controlled every aspect of my life. You made me believe I was worthless, that no one would help me if I tried to leave." The apartment that had been Rachel's prison now became the scene of Marcus's downfall. Police found detailed journals where Marcus had documented his control techniques, written schedules outlining Rachel's restricted activities, and financial records showing how he had systematically eliminated her access to money and resources. Most damning was Marcus's computer, which contained research into psychological manipulation techniques and detailed plans for maintaining control over Rachel and their future child. As officers placed Marcus under arrest, he maintained his calm demeanor, but his eyes held a fury that chilled everyone present. This wasn't over for him. In his mind, Rachel was still his property, and he would find a way to reclaim her. The charges against Marcus Rivera would eventually include kidnapping, false imprisonment, sexual assault, and stalking. But even facing decades in prison, Marcus refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. His only regret, he would later tell his lawyer, was that he hadn't been more careful about hiding the evidence. The trial of Marcus Rivera lasted 6 weeks and attracted national attention as an extreme example of psychological domestic abuse. Rachel's testimony, delivered with quiet strength, detailed 2 years of systematic manipulation that legal experts compare to techniques used by human traffickers. "He didn't just control my body," Rachel told the jury. "He controlled my thoughts, my memories, my sense of reality. He made me believe that his version of love was the only kind I deserved." Marcus's defense team argued that he was a caring partner trying to help Rachel through mental health issues. They painted him as a successful professional who had sacrificed his own comfort to care for an unstable girlfriend. But the evidence was overwhelming. Phone records showed Marcus had intercepted and deleted messages from Rachel's family and friends. Financial records proved he had deliberately sabotaged Rachel's attempts to find employment or maintain independence. Most compelling were the detailed journals where Marcus had documented his control techniques with clinical precision. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Marcus Rivera was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison without possibility of parole. During sentencing, he finally showed emotion, not remorse for his crimes, but anger at the system that had failed to understand his relationship with Rachel. Rachel, meanwhile, had begun the long process of rebuilding her life. With support from domestic violence counselors and her sister Carmen, she slowly reconnected with friends and family members she had lost during her relationship with Marcus. 5 months after Marcus's arrest, Rachel gave birth to a healthy daughter she named Hope. Holding her baby for the first time, Rachel made a promise that would define her future. Hope would grow up knowing her own worth, surrounded by people who supported her independence and celebrated her strength. Today, Rachel works as a domestic violence counselor, helping other survivors recognize the signs of psychological abuse and develop safety plans for leaving dangerous relationships. Her story has become a powerful tool for educating people about the subtle ways that abusers isolate and control their victims. "Marcus nearly succeeded in erasing me as a person," Rachel says. "But surviving taught me that even in our darkest moments, we have more strength than we realize." The key is recognizing that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the first step toward reclaiming your life. Carmen remains one of Rachel's strongest supporters, and their relationship has become a model for how family members can effectively help loved ones escape abusive situations. Marcus Rivera remains in prison, where he continues to maintain his innocence and blame Rachel for destroying his life by seeking help. What would you have done if you were Carmen, watching your sister disappear into an abusive relationship? What signs would you have recognized? Rachel's story shows us that domestic abuse often hides behind closed doors, but awareness and persistence can save lives. If this story moved you, remember that domestic violence affects people of all backgrounds and education levels. Trust your instincts when something seems wrong, and never hesitate to offer support to someone who might be trapped in an abusive situation. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply ask for help, and sometimes the most important thing we can do is be ready to provide it. Share this story if you believe everyone deserves to live free from fear and control. Your awareness could save someone's life.